is only one war that matters, and it is here.
So tomorrow marks the end of Season 7, and with the real possibility of us having to wait till 2019 for Season 8, I'm sure many of us are thinking about what happens after Game of Thrones is over. George R. R. Martin said that there are 4 successor shows that are in writing today. Even a 5th one is a possibility. We obviously have to wait and see if they really perfect the next season. But if they maintain the awesomeness and quality that we see in Game of Thrones, these spin-offs could be one of the best things that ever happened to fantasy in television. In this video, we're going to talk about the top 10 possible narratives that could follow Game of Thrones in these spin-offs. We're going to end it with a bonus narrative and my personal favorite. Disclaimer though, because these narratives are very long and we're talking in the span of years, I don't know if HBO is going to start doing more time jumps or if they're going to focus on one specific era. So we're going to look at the historical periods, the Dawn Age, the Age of Heroes and whatnot, and look at specific events there and form the narrative around it. So without further ado, let's jump into this week's top 10. So let's start at the very beginning, the Dawn Age. I have a feeling that a spin-off based off the Dawn Age would be completely different to the current Game of Thrones show. I mean, prehistoric Westeros was completely different and magic was supposedly assumed to exist. The whole show would have a completely different dynamic, so they'd have to do a complete makeover. I doubt they'd even use ideas that were already exploited in the current show. For instance, the First Men migrating from Essos, the war between them and the Children of the Forest, the creation of the White Walkers, the Pact on the Isle of the Faces, the First Men adopting the old gods. That would be insane from a hardcore fan's perspective, but I think that producing the spin-off would be completely different from what was already done here. Honestly, I have very little to no idea on how the show would be done, from the cast to the setting to the writing. I'd need a very big imagination because George R. R. Martin talks relatively little about the prehistory of Westeros. But I do know this. I think the book fans who think that the show is commercialized and who are really into the lore of the Song of Ice and Fire would really appreciate a Dawn Age, First Man versus the Children build-up show. Now, there are several events that I want to talk about in the Age of Heroes. The first one is probably one of the most controversial events in Westerosi history, the Long Night. Seeing the build-up of the White Walkers taking over Westeros, the Children of the Forest and the First Man banding together to take them down, and of course the Battle of Dawn that would give us insight to the prince that was promised and the Azor Ahai prophecy would be insane. For this, the build-up towards the end of the series needs to be perfected. Events in the Age of Heroes is so spread out throughout time, so I don't know if we're going to see more time jumps than in there to include the other historical main events, but I know this for sure. If it's perfected, this could be one of the best spin-offs in television history. Another interesting aspect would be to look at the foundation of the great houses that we see today in Game of Thrones. You know, like the stories say, get to see the characters like Lan the Clever cleverly snatching Casterly Rock from the Casterlys, or Bran the Builder founding House Stark and uniting the North under him. I definitely love to see the Grey King in the Iron Islands, and especially the Storm Kings. We didn't get to see much of the Stormlands in Game of Thrones, and the only great castle we haven't seen in Westeros is Storm's End. With Casterly Rock making its appearance in Season 7, it's the only castle that hasn't been on the show. So I think it could be a real possibility if one of the objectives of the producers would be to show all of the world of Westeros. All these events, including Bran the Builder building the wall and fighting the Night's King with the King beyond the wall, would be fantastic. I'm not sure whether HBO will include the small details though, like the Horn of Jorah Moon, which could tear down the wall. I feel like the lore is going to be slightly blindsided, but at the same time, can you blame them? There's so much to include in one series. But taking a look at the Age of Heroes would be a very, very interesting standpoint, so it's very likely that the producers might go that way. And now, of course, one of the most hyped spin-off possibilities, the Age of Valyria. One of the biggest controversies in Game of Thrones is the scarcity of Valyrian steel. We see very few families with a Valyrian steel sword of their own. The Valyrian freehold was considered as one of the biggest booming cities in the world of Game of Thrones, economically, politically, and militarily. The magic in Essos was strongest there. I'd love to see how a bunch of peaceful shepherds find dragons in volcanoes, learn how to tame them, and through the span of a few years, grow the biggest empire in Essos. The foundation of Valyria would be very interesting to see from one standpoint, and the original founding families and noble houses would be interesting to see. They could cover how the Freehold was founded and how the great families ruled and tamed dragons there. I definitely assume that power play is present between the big noble families, kind of like their version of the fight for the Iron Throne, except they'd have dragons and magic to make things more interesting. I can imagine a lot of CGI down this path, but I definitely want to see more of the Essos cities. I know I shouldn't be complaining, but I definitely would love to see more of the Eastern lore, the fighting, the history. So it would be insane to see historical events like the Giscari Wars. Going down this path, the spin-off would have several similarities with Game of Thrones from the political and wartime aspects. Another way to go is towards the end of the Age of Valyria, to see the Rhoynish Wars with the Freehold and the eventual Rhoynish migration to Dorne, to see the unification of Dorne under House Martell and its foundation, or I'd even love to see the Targaryens come to Westeros and set up a Dragonstone right before the Doom of Valyria. I think these two spin-offs are one of the most likely possibilities because there are many things that could be inspired from the current show between the characters, between the power play, between the noble houses and the aggression between each one. Obviously they have to add a few things we haven't seen before, but there are many themes in common between ruling and migrating from Valyria and ruling Westeros. So that'd be something interesting to see. Not to mention, it'd be interesting to see how the Doom of Valyria happened to get more insight because it's considered one of the biggest mysteries in the world of Game of Thrones. How did it happen? How did it build up there? We'd love to see more of that. So if the producers ever do something related to the Age of Valyria, that could be one of the pinpointing possibilities. And now the Targaryen dynasty. Seeing more of the Targaryen dynasty and their rule over Westeros would be epic. We often hear references to the previous Targaryen kings, and getting to see them throughout their rule would be amazing. Like the other narratives, I have no idea if HBO would cover the whole Targaryen dynasty. That sounds a bit unlikely, or if they're going to just cover a specific period. This would be an awesome spin-off. It'll definitely include at least one of the several pivotal wars that happened under the Targaryens, such as the Dornish Wars. Dorne is notorious for having fended off the Targaryens for centuries. Watching them fight off the encroaching Targaryens and even seeing them eventually come into the fold would be insane. HBO really pissed off book fans when they blindsided the Blackfyres from the show. We get very subtle references every once in a while, but if HBO makes a spin-off talking about the rise of the Blackfyres specifically, to see legendary characters like Daemon Blackfyre, one of the most powerful and skilled warriors in all of Westeros, and even his descendants, Maelys the Monstrous, and the rest of the Blackfyre pretenders. That would be absolutely insane and would appease a lot of the audience in Game of Thrones, including me. I know that the producers and George R.R. Martin said that he wouldn't include Robert's Rebellion and many events after Robert's reign, but I think this deserved a spot on the list. Robert's Rebellion. I hated how they painted Robert as a fat, drunk king because he was so much more than that. He's known as one of the most legendary, brutal warriors in Westeros. And I think this is one way of HBO making up for that mischaracterization. I said this in previous videos, but I personally love the build-up of Robert's Rebellion, the story of how the Vale, the Stormlands, and the North united against the Mad King. I'd love to see more of Rhaegar Targaryen, because unfortunately he wasn't covered that much in the show. Seeing Robert Baratheon at his prime in events like the Battle of the Trident and the Siege at Storm's End, where we see Stannis' bravery and his ability to hold it for so long, would definitely be one way to go. And now we arrive to my personal favorite. I would personally love to see the life of Sir Arthur Dayne and his house during that time. He was raised and taught to become the most skilled warrior in Westeros, how that meteor crashed and how they forged Dawn out of it, and maybe his time in the Kingsguard. You know, like certain events like the raid against the Kingswood Brotherhood. We get to see other knights like Barristan Selmy and even a young Jaime. That one scene in Bran's vision at the Tower of Joy really made me want to see more of him in the show. He's such a badass character and I feel like he's undervalued. Anything that involves all the legendary characters in Game of Thrones is a personal favorite of mine. So seeing someone as powerful and skilled as Arthur Dayne in his prime would definitely interest me. Alright, that's it guys. That's my top 10 predictions for the Game of Thrones spin-off narratives. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to see new content. I'm putting out content every other day, or at least I'm trying to. Be sure to hit the bell to get any notifications. So I'd love to know what you think the best narrative for the spin-offs should be. Please drop a comment below and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks guys. 24 hours left. Did you guys check out the wall? I just had it set up like 2 hours ago. Best double entendre you're ever gonna hear.